Lorenzo Rossi was a man who traded in shadows, but standing in the cold marble foyer of his estate at 3 a.m. with the scent of gunpowder clinging to his wool coat, he found a shadow he couldn't control. Clara, the maid who usually moved through the halls like a ghost, suddenly stepped into his path, her hand firm against his chest. She pressed a single finger to her lips, her eyes wide with a frantic, silent warning. "Don't let her know you're here." In Lorenzo's world, men died for less than touching him. Yet the raw terror in the woman who polished his silver made the iron boss go cold. He had returned early to find peace, carrying the heavy weight of a life spent in violence, only to hear a rhythmic, sobbing breath echoing from the upper gallery. Clara pulled him into the darkness behind a massive pillar, whispering that a confrontation would only seal the children's fate. From the veil of the shadows, Lorenzo watched his perfect fiancée, Isabella Moretti, standing over Nico and Mia like a predator. He listened, paralyzed, as she dismantled his children's spirits with a voice like a razor, realizing that while he ruled the streets, he had left his own blood at the mercy of a monster. Welcome, Helen Romance Library lovers. If stories of forbidden love and dangerous men make your heart race, please support me by subscribing. Help me reach 1,000 subscribers so I can bring you more addictive tales that will leave you breathless. Your support means the world to me. Now, let's dive into the story. Lorenzo Vitali had built his empire on the ability to read people. 30 years in the shadows of organized crime had taught him that everyone wore masks, and the key to survival was learning to see the face beneath. He had watched men lie with their dying breaths, had seen women smile while sliding knives between ribs, and had learned that the most dangerous predators often wore the most beautiful skins. But he had never thought to look beneath his own wife's mask. The nursery was in the east wing of the estate, far from the formal rooms where Isabella held court. Lorenzo rarely came here. That was by design, Isabella had always said. The children needed routine, stability, and a mother's touch rather than a father's shadow. He had believed her, as he had believed so many things, because thinking was easier than questioning. Tonight, though, sleep had eluded him. The house felt wrong somehow, the silence too heavy, the shadows too deep. He had risen from his empty bed. Isabella was at yet another charity function, and wandered the halls like a ghost in his own home. The sound stopped him outside the nursery door. Nico's voice, thin and frightened. "Please, Mama. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." And then Isabella's laugh, not the musical, practiced laugh she used at parties, but something else entirely. Something cold and cruel and utterly alien. "You'll be good because I tell you to be good, you stupid little creature. Do you think anyone would believe you if you told them? Do you think your father cares? He doesn't even know your names half the time." Lorenzo's blood turned to ice. He pressed himself against the wall, barely breathing, and peered through the crack in the door. Isabella stood over Nico's bed, her designer gown still perfect from the gala, her face twisted into something he had never seen before. 8-year-old Nico was curled into a ball, his arms wrapped around his younger sister Mia, who was sobbing silently into her brother's pajamas. "Mama's friends are coming tomorrow," Isabella continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "And you will smile and perform like the perfect little props you are. Or do I need to remind you what happens when you disappoint me?" Nico flinched as if struck, though Isabella's hands remained at her sides. The reaction spoke of history, of lessons already learned, of pain already endured. Lorenzo's hand found the doorframe, gripping it so hard the wood groaned. He should burst in. He should confront her. He should protect his children, as he had failed to protect so many things in his life. But 30 years of survival instinct held him frozen, and in that moment of hesitation, he saw something that changed everything. Isabella reached into her clutch and withdrew a small vial. She unscrewed it with practiced efficiency and added 3 drops to the glass of water on Nico's nightstand. "Drink your water before bed, darling," she said, and now her voice was honey again, warm and maternal. "You know how Mama worries about your health." Nico's hands shook as he reached for the glass. No. The word was barely a whisper, lost in the shadow of the hallway. Lorenzo watched his son drink, watched the resignation in those young eyes, and felt something inside him shatter beyond repair. He retreated before Isabella could emerge, moving through the darkness of his own home like a stranger. His mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the woman he had married, the elegant hostess, the perfect society wife, the mother of his children, with the monster he had just witnessed. But even as he struggled, pieces began falling into place. The children's quietness, which he had attributed to their reserved natures. The way they flinched when Isabella entered a room. Subtle, so subtle that he had never consciously registered it. The constant illnesses that plagued Nico, the specialists Isabella insisted on, and the medication she administered personally because she didn't trust the staff. How long? How long had this been happening under his roof, in his house, while he was busy building an empire of blood and money? Lorenzo made it to his study before his legs gave out. He collapsed into his leather chair, staring at the portrait of his family that hung above the fireplace. Isabella smiled down at him, beautiful and serene, her hands resting on the children's shoulders. The children weren't smiling. He had never noticed that before. He reached for the whiskey decanter with shaking hands, then stopped. The whiskey Isabella always poured for him. The meals she insisted on preparing herself. The vitamins she gave him every morning, pressing them into his palm with a kiss and a smile. Oh God! He set the decanter down and stared at his own reflection in its crystal surface. What else had he been blind to? And how long did he have to find out before his blindness killed him? The grandfather clock in the corner struck 3. In a few hours, the sun would rise, and Isabella would return from her gala, and she would smile at him across the breakfast table as if nothing were wrong. She would kiss his cheek and hand him his vitamins and ask about his day. And Lorenzo would smile back, because that was what survival required. But behind his smile, he would be planning, watching, waiting. The mask that had cracked tonight would have to be rebuilt, not for Isabella's benefit, but for his own. He needed time. Time to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. Time to find evidence. Time to find allies in a house full of people loyal to his wife. Most importantly, it's time to get his children out. Lorenzo rose from the chair and walked to the window, looking out over the manicured grounds of the estate. Somewhere out there, beyond the gates and the guards and the carefully maintained illusion of the perfect life, there had to be a way out. He just had to find it before Isabella found him. The dawn was coming, gray and cold, and with it, a new kind of war. Not the wars he was used to, territory disputes, rival families, and the violent mathematics of power and blood. This was something more intimate, more dangerous. This was a war for his children's lives, for his own life. And he could not afford to lose. Clara Reyes had worked in the Vitali household for 3 years, invisible in the way that servants were always invisible to the wealthy. She swept their floors, washed their sheets, and faded into the wallpaper whenever they deigned to notice her presence. They spoke freely in front of her, as if she were furniture, as if she had no ears, no memory, no purpose beyond the broom in her hands. They had no idea that every word was being recorded. Her room was in the basement, a converted storage space that the housekeeper had offered with apologetic eyes. "It's not much, but it's private," Mrs. Benedetti had said, and Clara had accepted with humble gratitude, hiding the fierce satisfaction that burned in her chest. Private was exactly what she needed. The room was small, a bed, a dresser, and a tiny bathroom behind a curtain. But behind the dresser, under it, hidden in a hollow she had carved herself, was a setup that would have impressed any intelligence agency. Miniature cameras, recording devices, and hard drives filled with 3 years of documentation. 3 years of watching. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of building a case that would burn the Moretti empire to the ground. Clara pulled off her maid's uniform and changed into jeans and a sweater, her nightly ritual. She settled at her makeshift desk, a wooden crate covered with a cloth, and began reviewing the day's footage. She had cameras everywhere. In the main dining room, where business was discussed over dinner. In Isabella's private study, where the real decisions were made. In the nursery where Clara stopped the footage, her hand trembling over the mouse. She had seen many terrible things in this house. Murder planned over wine. Bodies are disposed of like garbage. The casual cruelty of people who had never faced consequences for anything in their lives. But watching Isabella Vitali torment her own children still made Clara's stomach turn. She forced herself to continue to document, to add the footage to the ever-growing archive. Because this wasn't just about the children, as much as they mattered. This was about justice. This was about Marco. Her brother's face smiled at her from the small photograph taped to the wall. He had been 22 when Isabella destroyed him. Young, idealistic, and stupid enough to fall in love with a woman who collected hearts like trophies. When he threatened to expose her affair to her husband, Isabella arranged his death to look like a suicide. Clara had been 17. She had spent the next 10 years preparing for this moment. A knock at her door made her freeze. No one came to her room. No one even acknowledged that the basement quarters existed. She closed the laptop and slid it under the bed, then opened the door a crack. Lorenzo Vitali stood in the dim hallway, looking like a man who had seen a ghost. His face was gray, his eyes hollow, and for a moment, Clara felt a spike of fear. Had he discovered her? Had her careful invisibility finally failed? Mr. Vitali. She kept her voice steady. Is there something you need? You've worked here 3 years. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. You see things. You hear things. The staff always does. His eyes met hers, and Clara saw something there she hadn't expected. Desperation. I need to know what else you've seen. The moment stretched between them. Clara could lie. She could play dumb, protect her cover, and continue gathering evidence until she had enough to destroy them all. It was the smart play. The safe play. But she looked at this man, this powerful, dangerous man who had suddenly realized he was trapped in a cage of his own making, and she made a different choice. Come inside, Mr. Vitali, and close the door behind you. He hesitated only a moment before stepping into her room. His eyes swept the space, taking in the poverty of it, the contrast with the opulence upstairs, and then landed on the photograph of Marco. Who is that? My brother. Clara reached under the bed and retrieved the laptop. Isabella killed him 7 years ago. She made it look like suicide. She watched the information land, watched Lorenzo's face cycle through disbelief, recognition, and finally, grim acceptance. You've been watching us. I've been watching her. Clara opened the laptop and turned it toward him. 3 years of footage. Business dealings, murder conspiracies, money laundering, and what she does to your children when you're not looking. Lorenzo stared at the screen, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. Why haven't you gone to the police? Because the Moretti family owns half the police force in this city. Because the evidence needs to be overwhelming, irrefutable, and presented to people who can't be bought. Clara met his eyes. And because I needed someone on the inside who had a reason to help me. Someone with power and resources. Someone who would be desperate enough to bring down his own wife. You were waiting for me to find out. I was hoping. She gestured to the screen. I couldn't make you see what you didn't want to see. But now that you have. Lorenzo was silent for a long moment, watching footage he clearly wished he could unsee. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "What do you want?" "Justice." The word was simple, absolute. "For my brother. For your children. For everyone that family has destroyed. And you trust me to help you get it? I'm not exactly an innocent party here. I know exactly what you are, Mr. Vitali." Clara closed the laptop. "But you love your children. That makes you the only person in this house I can use." He should have been offended by the bluntness. Instead, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You're smarter than you look, Clara Reyes. I'd have to be to survive this long." Lorenzo nodded slowly, some decision crystallizing behind his eyes. "Show me everything you have. All of it. And then we're going to make a plan." Clara allowed herself, for the first time in 7 years, to feel something like hope. "Follow me, Mr. Vitali. We have a lot of ground to cover." The evidence took hours to review. By the time they finished, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the basement room in shades of gray through the small window near the ceiling. Lorenzo sat on Clara's narrow bed, his face aged 10 years in a single night, while Clara compiled the final piece of evidence she had been saving. "There's one more thing you need to see. I'm not sure I can handle more. You need to handle this." Clara pulled out a small case and opened it to reveal a row of pills, identical to the vitamins Isabella gave Lorenzo every morning. "I've been collecting these for months, switching them out when I can, documenting the dosages." Lorenzo stared at the pills. "What are they?" "A compound called digitoxin, mixed with several other substances to mask the taste and slow the effects. Individually, each dose is harmless. Cumulatively, over months or years, they cause progressive heart failure." Clara's voice was clinical and detached. The symptoms would appear natural: fatigue, shortness of breath, irregular heartbeat. Eventually, a fatal heart attack that no autopsy would question. The color drained from Lorenzo's face. "She's been poisoning me. For at least 18 months, based on my observations." Clara handed him a folder. "I had the pills analyzed by a chemist I trust. His report is here. The dosage she's been giving you would likely result in death within 2 to 3 years." Lorenzo's hands shook as he opened the folder and scanned the chemical analysis. His empire had been built on violence, on the willingness to do what others wouldn't. He had ordered deaths, sanctioned executions, and made widows and orphans without losing a night's sleep. But this, being murdered slowly by his own wife, over breakfasts and good morning kisses, this was something different. This was an intimate betrayal of a kind he hadn't thought possible. "Why?" The word was barely a whisper. "Why not just have me killed outright? She has the connections." "Because you're more useful to her alive." Clara sat across from him, her voice patient. "You built this empire, Mr. Vitali. The business relationships, the political connections, the network of loyalties, they're all tied to you personally. If you died suddenly, were assassinated, or were in some suspicious accident, those relationships would fracture. Rivals would see weakness. The whole structure might collapse. But if I die of natural causes, she inherits everything. The sympathy of a grieving widow. The time to consolidate power, to transfer loyalties, to ensure the children are entirely under her control." Clara's eyes were hard. "By the time the organization realizes you were the only thing holding it together, she'll have her claws in too deep to remove." Lorenzo closed the folder and set it aside with exaggerated care, as if it might explode. "How long have I been taking these?" "The full-strength doses?" "About 6 months, based on when I started observing behavioral changes in you. The fatigue you attributed to stress. the headaches, the occasional dizziness. Clara paused. The good news is, the damage is likely reversible if you stop taking them now. Digitoxin has a long half-life, but with proper medical treatment, you could make a full recovery. The good news. Lorenzo laughed, and there was no humor in it. Is there more good news, Clara? Because so far tonight I've learned that my wife is poisoning me and that she tortures our children, and I've been living in a carefully constructed prison for God knows how long. The good news is that you're still alive. Your children are still alive. And now you know the truth. Clara leaned forward. Most men in your position die without ever realizing what's happening to them. Isabella is careful, meticulous. The only reason I caught it is that I was specifically looking for evidence of murder. Because of your brother. Because of Marco. Clara's voice softened for just a moment. He was the first one I could confirm, but I doubt he was actually the first. Isabella has been playing this game for a long time. She's very, very good at it. Lorenzo rose from the bed and paced the small room, his mind racing through implications and contingencies. He had spent his career anticipating threats, neutralizing enemies before they could strike. The irony of being outmaneuvered by his own wife was not lost on him. I need time, he said finally. Time to get the children out, time to arrange safe passage, time to ensure that evidence reaches the right people. You may not have as much time as you think. He turned to face her. What do you mean? Clara pulled up another video on her laptop. This is from last week. Isabella is meeting with two men I've identified as professional cleaners, assassins who specialize in making deaths look accidental. The video was grainy but clear enough. Isabella sat in her private study, speaking with two men in unremarkable suits. Her voice was cool and businesslike. The timeline has moved up. His symptoms are progressing faster than expected. Probably the stress of the Calabrese situation. I need this finished within the month. One of the men nodded. Heart attack during sleep? Or a fall? Something that won't raise questions. Isabella smiled, and it was the same cold smile Lorenzo had seen in the nursery. He's been so fragile lately. Everyone will believe it. The video ended. Lorenzo stared at the blank screen, feeling the walls closing in around him. A month. Maybe less. Clara closed the laptop. She's accelerating the timeline. Which means whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. We can't just run. If I disappear, she'll hunt us down. She has resources, connections. I know. Clara stood facing him directly. That's why we're not going to run, Mr. Vitali. We're going to die. He stared at her. Not actually die, she clarified. But the world needs to believe we did. Isabella needs to believe she won. It's the only way to get close enough to destroy her without her seeing us coming. Lorenzo considered this, the audacity of it, the risk, the sheer desperate gamble. You've planned this. For 7 years. Clara's smile was thin and sharp. All I needed was the right ally. Now I have one. She extended her hand. Lorenzo looked at it for a long moment. This young woman who had infiltrated his household, documented his family's crimes, and was now offering him a chance at redemption he didn't deserve. Then he took her hand and shook it. Tell me the plan. The next 3 days were an exercise in calculated deception. Lorenzo played the loving husband, the attentive father, and the increasingly frail patriarch. He took Isabella's vitamins each morning, then discreetly vomited them back up in his private bathroom. He complained of dizziness, of chest pain, and of a bone-deep exhaustion that wasn't entirely fabricated. Isabella was solicitous, concerned, and the picture of wifely devotion. She insisted he rest, brought him specially prepared meals, and sat by his bedside reading aloud from books he'd never asked to hear. Her performance was flawless, and now that Lorenzo knew what lay beneath it, he found himself marveling at her skill. How long had she been practicing? How many men had fallen for this before him? He didn't want to know. Meanwhile, Clara worked in the shadows, preparing their escape. The estate had a network of service tunnels dating back to Prohibition, a fact that most of the current staff had forgotten if they'd ever known. Clara had mapped every inch of them, identified the exits, and stashed supplies at strategic points. "We can't take anything that will be missed," she explained during one of their clandestine meetings. "No luggage, no personal items, nothing that might alert the household before we're clear." "What about money?" "I have accounts under assumed names. Not a fortune, but enough to disappear." She paused. "You'll have to leave everything behind, Mr. Vitali. The money, the power, the identity. Lorenzo Vitali needs to die tonight." He should have felt more grief at the prospect. Instead, he felt only relief. And the children? That's the hardest part. Clara's face was grim. "We need to get them out without alerting Isabella. If she suspects anything, she'll use them as leverage." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Or worse. Or worse. They decided on a night when Isabella would be attending a charity board meeting, a 3-hour affair that would give them a window to move. Lorenzo would put the children to bed as usual, then extract them through the servants' wing and into the tunnels. Clara would handle the diversion, creating evidence of an attack that would explain their disappearances. It was risky. It was desperate. It was the only chance they had. The night arrived cold and clear, stars sharp in the winter sky. Lorenzo watched Isabella leave in a swirl of perfume and silk, accepting her kiss on his cheek with a smile that felt like glass. "Rest, darling," she said, her hand lingering on his face. "You look so tired lately." "I'll be fine. Have a good evening." "I always do." He watched her car disappear down the driveway, then moved. The children were already in bed when he reached the nursery. Nico was reading by flashlight under his covers, a small act of rebellion that made Lorenzo's heart ache with pride and regret. Mia was asleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. "Papa." Nico's voice was wary. He was always wary now. "Is something wrong?" Lorenzo knelt beside his bed, and for a moment he couldn't speak. All the times he had been absent, all the moments he had missed, all the warnings he had ignored, they crashed over him like a wave. "I need you to be very brave tonight, Nico. Can you do that for me?" His son's eyes widened, but he nodded. "We're going on a trip. A secret trip, just the 4 of us. But we have to be very quiet and very quick, and we can't take anything with us. Do you understand? Are we running away?" Lorenzo hesitated, then told his son the first truth he'd spoken in years. "Yes. We're running away from something bad. And I need you to help me protect your sister." Nico's face went through a series of emotions. Fear, confusion, and then something that looked almost like hope. Is it about Mama?" The question broke something in Lorenzo's chest. "Yes, Nico. It's about Mama." His son nodded slowly, and in that moment, Lorenzo saw the truth written plainly on his child's face. Nico knew. He had always known. He had been waiting, praying, for someone to finally acknowledge what was happening. "Okay, Papa." Nico slipped out of bed and moved to wake his sister. "I'll be brave." Clara met them in the servants' wing, dressed in dark clothes, her expression all business. "We have less time than we thought. Isabella's car is coming back up the drive." "What?" "The meeting should last for hours." She must have suspected something. Clara was already moving, leading them toward the hidden entrance to the tunnels. "We need to go. Now." The entrance was concealed behind a false wall in the old wine cellar. Clara had the panel open in seconds, revealing a dark passageway that smelled of dust and forgotten things. "Stay close. Don't make a sound." They descended into darkness just as Lorenzo heard the front door of the estate open above them and Isabella's voice calling his name. The tunnels were narrow and cold, lit only by the small flashlight Clara carried. Lorenzo held Mia in his arms, her face pressed against his shoulder, while Nico walked beside him with his hand gripping the back of Lorenzo's jacket. The silence was absolute except for their breathing and the scuff of their footsteps on ancient stone. Behind them, muffled by layers of earth and concrete, Lorenzo could hear Isabella's voice raised in alarm. She had found his bedroom empty. She was calling for the staff, for security, for someone to explain where her husband had gone. Soon, she would check the nursery. Soon, she would realize the children were missing too. Soon she would know. How much farther? Lorenzo whispered. Another 100 meters. The tunnel exits behind the old groundskeeper's cottage. It's been abandoned for years. They moved faster, Nico stumbling in the darkness, Lorenzo's arms aching from Mia's weight. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, walls pressing in, air growing thick and stale. Finally, Clara stopped at a rusted metal door. She produced a key from her pocket and wrestled with the ancient lock. "Come on, come on." The lock clicked. The door groaned open. Cold night air rushed in, and Lorenzo tasted freedom for the first time in years. They emerged into a tangle of overgrown bushes behind a dilapidated cottage. The main estate was visible in the distance, lit up like a Christmas tree, with figures moving across the grounds with flashlights. "They're searching for us already," Clara said. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they expand to the outer perimeter." The car, hidden in the woods, half a kilometer north. "Can you carry her that far?" "I'll carry her to the ends of the earth if I have to." They moved through the darkness, staying low, avoiding the pools of light cast by the estate's security systems. Nico was silent and focused, his small hand never leaving Lorenzo's jacket. Mia had woken but seemed to understand instinctively that this was not a time for questions. The woods closed around them, dark and sheltering. Clara led the way with the confidence of someone who had walked this path 100 times in her imagination, waiting for the night it would become real. The car was exactly where she'd said it would be, a nondescript sedan, old enough not to have GPS tracking, new enough to be reliable. Lorenzo settled the children into the back seat while Clara slid behind the wheel. "Stay down," he told them. "No matter what happens, stay down." Nico nodded, pulling Mia close, covering them both with the blanket Clara had left on the seat. Lorenzo took the passenger seat, and Clara started the engine. It turned over on the first try, a small miracle in a night that badly needed one. "We have safe houses established at intervals," Clara said as she navigated the narrow forest road. "The first one is 3 hours north. After that, we assess and decide on the next steps." "And Isabella? She'll assume we're dead within 24 hours. I've left enough evidence to suggest an attack, signs of forced entry, a staged struggle. By the time she realizes the truth, we'll be ghosts." Lorenzo looked back at his children, huddled together in the back seat, their eyes wide in the darkness. "We're already ghosts," he said quietly. "Lorenzo Vitali died tonight. The question is what rises from his ashes." Clara glanced at him, and for the first time, he saw something like respect in her eyes. "That, Mr. Vitali, is entirely up to you." The car emerged from the forest onto a country highway, empty and dark. The lights of the estate disappeared behind them, and Lorenzo felt the first threads of the life he had built begin to unravel. He didn't look back. There was nothing behind him worth seeing. The rain started an hour into their drive, a heavy curtain that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Clara drove with white-knuckled focus, her eyes never leaving the road, while Lorenzo monitored the side mirrors for any sign of pursuit. For the first 40 minutes there was nothing. Just the rain and the dark and the hum of the engine. Then the headlights appeared behind them. "We have company." Clara's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Could be nothing. Could be. The headlights accelerated, gaining ground fast. Too fast for a casual driver in these conditions. "Hold on." Clara pressed the accelerator, and the sedan surged forward. The children in the back seat grabbed onto whatever they could find. Nico's arm wrapped protectively around his sister. "Papa." Mia's voice was small and scared. "It's okay, sweetheart. Clara's going to get us out of this." "They're catching up," Clara said through gritted teeth. "This car doesn't have the horsepower to outrun them." "Then we outsmart them." Lorenzo's mind raced through options. "There's a turnoff 3 kilometers ahead. It leads to an old quarry. The road's barely passable in good weather." "And in this weather?" "Suicide for anyone who doesn't know it. But I used to hunt in these woods. I know every twist." Clara made a split-second decision. Navigate. The next 10 minutes were the longest of Lorenzo's life. He called out turns in the darkness, Clara wrestling the wheel through mud and gravel, the pursuing vehicle gaining ground despite the treacherous conditions. Sharp left. Now. The sedan slewed around a corner, tires screaming. Behind them, the pursuing vehicle followed. Too fast, too confident. "Nico," Lorenzo called back. "When I say now, I need you to cover your sister's ears and close your eyes. Can you do that?" "Yes, Papa." "Good boy." They crested a hill, and Lorenzo saw what he was looking for, a collapsed section of road where spring flooding had washed away the guardrail and half the lane. In daylight, it was a hazard. In darkness, in rain, at high speed. "Bear right." "No." "Hard." Clara yanked the wheel. The sedan skidded to the right, missing the collapsed section by inches. Behind them, the pursuing vehicle didn't have the same warning. "Now, Nico." The crash was spectacular. Metal screaming against rock, the sickening crunch of a vehicle tumbling down the quarry face. Lorenzo didn't look. He didn't need to. "Keep driving," he said quietly. Clara's hands were shaking on the wheel, but she didn't slow down. They drove in silence for another hour before the adrenaline began to fade. Mia had fallen asleep despite everything, her head in Nico's lap. The boy was awake, staring out the rain-streaked window at nothing. "Those were bad men?" he asked finally. Lorenzo considered lying, protecting his son from the truth a little longer. But Nico had protected himself and his sister for years without anyone's help. He deserved honesty. "Yes. They were bad men, sent by someone who wants to hurt us." "Bye, Mama." Not a question. Lorenzo felt his heart break all over again. "Yes, Nico. Bye, Mama." The boy was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier than any 8-year-old's had a right to be. "I'm glad we left, Papa. I'm glad you finally saw." The words were a knife, but Lorenzo accepted them. He had earned every cut. "I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner." "It's okay." Nico's hand reached forward, touching Lorenzo's shoulder. "You see now. That's what matters." Clara glanced at the rearview mirror, and Lorenzo saw her eyes glisten in the dim light. "The safe house is 20 minutes out," she said quietly. "We'll rest there. Regroup. Figure out next steps." Lorenzo nodded, his hand coming up to cover his son's. They had survived the night. Whatever came next, they would face it together. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Lorenzo Vitali felt something like hope. The cabin was small and isolated, hidden in a valley that didn't appear on most maps. Clara had stocked it months ago. Non-perishable food, medical supplies, clean clothes, everything they might need to disappear. But disappearing would have to wait. They had been at the cabin for 3 days when Isabella found them. Lorenzo was outside, chopping wood for the fire, an unfamiliar task that left his hands blistered and his muscles aching, when he heard the sound of engines. Multiple vehicles, approaching fast. He dropped the axe and ran for the cabin. "They're coming. Get the children." Clara was already moving, but it was too late. The first SUV burst through the tree line, followed by 2 more, disgorging armed men who surrounded the cabin with practiced efficiency. And stepping out of the lead vehicle, immaculate despite the mud and chaos, was Isabella. She looked like a woman attending a garden party. Designer coat, perfectly styled hair, and a smile that could have graced a magazine cover. Only her eyes betrayed the truth. Cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of human warmth. "Lorenzo, darling." Her voice was honey and poison. "You've led me on quite the chase." He positioned himself between Isabella and the cabin door, where he could hear Nico trying to quiet Mia's frightened crying. "It's over, Isabella. I know everything. The poison, the abuse, your plans to take over the organization." "Plans?" She laughed, musically and emptily. "Darling, I've already taken over the organization. You were dead the moment I decided you should be. Your heart just hasn't stopped beating yet. And the children. Your own children." Something flickered in her expression. Not guilt, but calculation. "The children are assets. Like everything else in this family. They'll be raised properly once you're out of the picture. Trained, disciplined, made into something useful. You're a monster. I'm a pragmatist." She stepped closer, and Lorenzo saw the gun holstered at her hip. "I married you for your power, Lorenzo. Your name, your connections, and your ability to make the organization profitable. I never loved you. I never loved anyone. Love is a weakness I cannot afford." "And Marco Reyes?" Clara's brother. Isabella's smile widened. "Ah, so that's how you figured it out. The little maid with her hidden cameras and her sad story." She glanced toward the cabin. "Is she in there? I'd love to see her face when I put a bullet in yours." "She's gone." The lie came easily. Left 2 days ago with all the evidence. By now, the FBI has everything. A crack in the facade, a moment of uncertainty in Isabella's perfect mask. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Lorenzo forced himself to smile. "Test me, Isabella. Kill me right here and see what happens. See how long it takes for federal agents to knock on your door." The silence stretched between them, taut and dangerous. Behind him, Lorenzo heard the cabin door creak open. Clara's voice, steady and clear. "He's not bluffing." Isabella's eyes shifted, and her composure fractured further when she saw the phone in Clara's hand. "This call is being recorded and transmitted to a secure server, along with 3 years of evidence documenting your crimes. Murder, conspiracy, fraud, child abuse. Enough to put you away for several lifetimes." Clara stepped forward to stand beside Lorenzo. "It's over, Mrs. Vitali. You can kill us all right here, but it won't change what's already been set in motion." For a long moment, Isabella stood frozen, her hand hovering near her gun. Lorenzo watched the calculations running behind her eyes, the weighing of options, the search for an angle, and the desperate scramble for control. Then, slowly, her hand dropped to her side. "You think you've won." Her voice was quiet and dangerous. "You think you can destroy everything I've built and just walk away?" "I don't want to walk away." Lorenzo met her gaze. "I want to watch you fall." Isabella's smile returned, but it was brittle now, cracking at the edges. "Then watch carefully, darling. Because when I go down, I'm taking everything with me. She turned and walked back to her vehicle. The armed men hesitated, then followed, engines roaring to life, tires spraying mud as the convoy disappeared back into the forest. Clara let out a breath she'd been holding. That was too easy. She's regrouping, calculating her next move. Lorenzo turned to face the cabin, where Nico stood in the doorway with Mia in his arms. But we have something she doesn't have. What's that? Proof. Lorenzo looked at Clara. Time to make that call. The real one. The FBI field office was a bland building in a bland city, with fluorescent lights and institutional furniture designed to strip away any sense of drama or importance. Lorenzo found it oddly appropriate. Justice, real justice, didn't happen in courtrooms lit by Hollywood spotlights. It happened in rooms like this, with tired agents and mountains of paperwork and the slow grinding process of building an airtight case. Special Agent Rebecca Torres had been working on organized crime for 15 years. She'd seen a lot of criminals try to cut deals, offer information, and trade their way to lighter sentences. Lorenzo Vitali was different. "You're not asking for immunity," she said, studying him across the interview table. "You're not even asking for protection beyond what we're already providing." "I did things." Lorenzo's voice was calm and matter-of-fact. "I ordered deaths. I facilitated crimes. I built an empire on blood and money. I'm not asking to escape the consequences of that." "Then what are you asking for?" "A chance to end it. Not just Isabella, not just the Moretti family, the whole network. The politicians in their pockets, the cops on their payroll, the legitimate businesses that launder their money." He leaned forward. "I can give you everything, Agent Torres. Names, dates, account numbers. Enough to bring down the entire operation." Torres studied him for a long moment. "And in return, my children are placed in witness protection, regardless of what happens to me. They get new identities, a chance at a normal life." He paused. "And Clara Reyes gets immunity. She's not a criminal. She was just a woman trying to get justice for her brother." Clara Reyes infiltrated a major criminal organization and conducted illegal surveillance for 3 years. Clara Reyes gathered the evidence that's going to help you bring down the biggest organized crime operation in the Northeast. Lorenzo met Torres's eyes. "Without her, you have nothing. She deserves to walk away from this clean." The negotiation took 3 more days. Lawyers were involved, immunity agreements were drafted, and protection protocols were established. In the end, Lorenzo got most of what he asked for, and surrendered everything he had been. The trial that followed was the most significant organized crime prosecution in decades. Lorenzo testified for 6 days, laying out the inner workings of the Moretti empire with the clinical precision of a man who had finally decided to tell the truth about his life. Clara's evidence filled in the gaps: video recordings, financial documents, and recorded conversations that left no room for doubt. Isabella sat in the defendant's chair throughout, her perfect mask never slipping, her eyes fixed on Lorenzo with a hatred that could have burned holes through steel. When the guilty verdict came down, she didn't flinch. She simply turned to look at him one final time. "You've destroyed everything," she said. "No." Lorenzo held her gaze. "I've destroyed you. Everything else, the children, the future, the chance at something better, I saved that." The guards led her away, and Lorenzo never saw her again. His own sentencing was harder to bear. 15 years, reduced from life due to his cooperation and testimony. He would be in his late 60s when he got out, an old man, his prime years spent behind bars. But his children would be free. Clara would be free. The network that had fed on human suffering for generations would be gone. On balance, Lorenzo considered it a fair trade. 2 years into his sentence, a letter arrived at the federal prison where Lorenzo was serving his time. The return address was a small coastal town he'd never heard of, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. He opened it with hands that had grown rough from prison labor and found a photograph inside. Nico, now 10, grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile. Mia, 8, her dark hair and pigtails, holding up a crayon drawing of what looked like a family. 2 children, a woman, and a man at a workbench. On the back of the photo, in Clara's precise handwriting, "They're happy. They're safe. They ask about you every day. We'll be waiting." Lorenzo stared at the photograph until the lights went out for the night, and for the first time in his life, he cried. 13 years later, a man walked out of federal prison into blinding sunlight. He was 63 years old, his hair fully gray, his face lined by time and regret and hard-won wisdom. He carried a single duffel bag containing everything he owned in the world. Some clothes, some books, and a stack of letters held together with a rubber band. A car was waiting in the parking lot. A woman stood beside it, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Vitali. It's Lawrence now." He smiled, and it felt rusty and unfamiliar. "Just Lawrence." Clara smiled back. "The children are waiting. They wanted to come, but I thought, maybe it should be just us first." The children. The word caught in his throat. They're not children anymore, are they? No. Nico's in college. Pre-law, if you can believe it. Says he wants to put away people like. She hesitated. People like me were. It's okay. He should. Lorenzo took a deep breath of free air. And Mia. Finishing high school. She wants to be a marine biologist. She says the ocean is the only place big enough to hold all her dreams. The tears came again, and Lorenzo didn't try to stop them. They drove for hours, leaving the city behind, following the coast north and west until the towns grew smaller and the air tasted of salt. The landscape transformed from concrete and steel to trees and water, and Lorenzo felt something loosening in his chest with every mile. Finally, they turned onto a narrow road that wound through a forest of evergreens, emerging onto a bluff overlooking the Pacific. A small house sat there, weathered cedar and wide windows, smoke curling from a chimney. And on the porch, 2 young adults stood waiting. Lorenzo got out of the car on shaking legs. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if words existed for this moment. This reunion that he had dreamed of for 15 years, through trial and testimony and endless prison nights. Nico moved first. He crossed the distance in long strides and wrapped his arms around his father, holding on with a fierceness that said everything words couldn't. "Welcome home, Papa." Then Mia was there too, and Clara, and they were all tangled together in the cold salt air, crying and laughing and holding on as if they might never let go. Later, after dinner and stories and a fire that burned long into the night, Lorenzo walked out onto the porch to watch the stars over the ocean. The world was quiet here, peaceful in a way he had never known. Clara joined him, pressing a mug of tea into his hands. "What are you thinking?" "That I don't deserve this." He gestured at the house, the view, and the life that waited inside. "Any of it. Deserve is a complicated word." Clara leaned against the railing beside him. "You did terrible things. But you also stopped doing them. You chose your children over your power. You chose justice over vengeance. That has to count for something." Lorenzo sipped his tea and considered this. "There's a workshop in the shed," Clara added. "I had it built a few years ago. Nico said you used to do woodworking before. Everything. When I was young. Another life. Maybe it's time for a new life." She touched his arm gently. "The town needs a carpenter. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. The kind that builds things instead of destroying them. Lorenzo looked at her, this woman who had spent years planning to destroy him, only to become the architect of his salvation. Why? He asked. After everything I was, everything I did, why did you give me this chance? Clara was quiet for a long moment. Because you loved them, she said finally. When you realized the truth about Isabella, your first thought wasn't about yourself. It was about Nico and Mia. That was the moment I knew you could be saved. She met his eyes. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, Lawrence. Even men like you. The next morning, a man named Lawrence walked into the town's hardware store and bought a set of carpentry tools. He spent the afternoon in the shed, relearning skills his hands had once known, building a simple wooden box that would hold his letters. It wasn't much. A small life, a quiet life, a life measured in sawdust and salt air and dinners with his children. But it was his. Honestly earned, honestly lived. And for a man who had spent 50 years building empires of blood and lies, it was more than enough. On a warm evening 6 months later, Nico found his father on the porch, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and rose. You seem happy, Papa. Lawrence smiled, a real smile, easy and unguarded. I am. Did you ever think you'd end up here? A carpenter in a small town. No. Lawrence looked at his son, this young man who had inherited his mother's beauty and his father's stubbornness but who had somehow forged himself into something better than either. But that's the thing about life, Nico. It's never too late to become someone new. Nico sat beside him, and together they watched the sun sink below the horizon. I'm proud of you, Papa, for what you did, for choosing us. I should have chosen you sooner. Maybe. Nico shrugged. But you chose us eventually. That's what matters. The stars emerged, one by one, over the darkening water. Somewhere inside the house, Mia was laughing at something Clara said, and the sound drifted out through the open windows like music. Lawrence closed his eyes and listened. This was his life now. Not the throne he had sat upon, not the empire he had built, not the man he had been. Just this. A house on a bluff. A family that had forgiven him. A chance to be the father his children deserved. It was, he realized, everything he had ever wanted. He just hadn't known it until he lost everything else. The end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.